Now it's my pleasure to introduce our distinguished speaker, Professor Hyunhee Park from the City University of New York, John Jay College, and the CUNY Graduate Center. Professor Park is a prominent historian specializing in global history and cross-cultural exchanges with a focus on knowledge transmission across civilizations, whether through geology, food, or even distillation technologies. Today, she will take us on a journey through Soju's fascinating transformation from the Mongol era origins to its localization in Korea, plus its rise as a modern cultural symbol. Without further ado, please join me in welcoming Dr. Park.
Good evening, everyone. It's truly an honor to be here today, sharing this space with such distinguished guests as enthusiasts of Korean history and culture. Before I begin, I would like to extend my sincere gratitude to Center for International Affairs at the Academy of Korean Studies for their generous invitation and for making this gathering possible. So it's always a pleasure to engage in discussions that bridge Korean history with broader global perspectives. And I'm delighted to see so many of you here today. Now, let me start with a question. What comes to mind when you think of Soju? So for many, the image is clear. Small green bottle, as you see in the PowerPoint, lively toast at bustling Korean barbecue restaurants, or even the latest K-pop stars or K-drama star promoting Soju brand. Perhaps some of you have even tasted Soju yourselves, whether straight, mixed with beer like somek, or in a creative cocktail. But even if you think you have never had Soju, you may have consumed it without knowing it, especially if you enjoy Korean condiments like gochujang, red chili paste. Some food producers such as Maki's Soju manufacture traditionally distilled soju with up to 50% alcohol, not for drinking, but for use in food manufacturing as a preservative and flavor stabilizer. In this way, soju is not only a beverage, but also a hidden ingredient in Korean cuisine, connecting everyday culinary experiences to a long history of distilled spirits. Soju, after all, has become one of the most recognizable symbols of Korean culture on the global stage. However, beyond its modern pop culture associations, Soju carries a far richer and more intricate history. Its story is not just about the drink, but about movement of people, ideas, and technology across vast landscapes and centuries. It's a story deeply embedded in a global historical exchanges, as illustrated by this map showing the development of various spirits across Afro-Eurasia and the possible routes through which distillation technology spread. While soju is often regarded as Korea's national liquor, its origins and trajectory cannot be fully understood without looking beyond Korea's borders. The history of distilled liquor in Korea is not one of isolated invention, but one of technological transfer, cultural adaptation, and global integration. A process that spans Eurasia and unfolds over centuries. So today, we will explore this fascinating journey of soju through four key historical transitions, each making a crucial moment in its transformation. First, the Mongol period from 13th to 14th century, the rise of distilled liquors in world history actually, and the introduction of distillation technology to Korea within the broader context of Mongol expansion and cross-cultural exchanges. And second, the Choson dynasty from 15th to 19th century, the localization of soju, its adaptation to Korean customs, and its role in royal, medical, and household settings. And then third, industrialization and the 20th century, The shift from traditional brewing to large-scale factory production, influenced by colonial rule, economic development, and government regulations. And the fourth, globalization in the 21st century. Soju's international, we can see Soju's international rise is branding as a global beverage and its reinvention through cross-cultural influences. By the end of this talk, I hope to offer a fresh perspective on Soju, not simply as a Korean cultural artifact, but as a product of centuries of exchange, innovation, and adaptation. Understanding Soju's history through this broader lens allows us to appreciate Korea's dynamic role in global history, highlighting its active participation in technological and cultural transformations rather than viewing its traditions as isolated developments. So this lecture draws on my book, Soju, A Global History, which traces the cross-cultural trajectory of Soju from its origins to its modern global presence. I hope to share this with you not only some of the key findings of this research, but also the broader historical questions it raises about cultural transmission and adaptation. So let's begin our journey into the world of Soju, tracing its trajectory from its historical roots to its present-day global prominence. So before we delve into the historical journey of Soju, it's important to begin with a clear understanding of what Soju actually is. So many people recognize it as Korea's signature alcohol beverage, but how does it compare to other types of liquor globally, and what makes it distinct? So at its core, Soju is a distilled liquor. This places it in a different category from naturally fermented beverages such as beer, wine, or Korea's traditional makgeolli. Fermentation, as some of you may know, is a process that humans likely discovered through observing nature, like grapes fermenting into wine or grains fermenting into beer under the right conditions. Distillation, by contrast, does not occur naturally. It's a technological process, a product of scientific ingenuity. So through distillation, alcohol is separated and concentrated from a fermented liquid by heating it until alcohol evaporates, then cooling the vapor to collect it again in liquid form. In some northern climates, distillation could even be achieved by freezing. This process produces a stronger spirit with a higher alcohol content, and it requires not only an understanding of differing boiling points, but also a specialized piece of equipment, a still. For example, the pot stills used to make French cognac are carefully designed to guide the rising vapor into a condenser, where it cools and turns into a clear, high-proof liquid. So these stills represent just one type of distillation of apparatus developed in Europe. But thanks to the work of scholars like Joseph Needham, we know that Asia developed its own distillation traditions much earlier with distinct apparatuses that differ significantly from European models. So before industrial soju took over in the 20th century, Koreans made soju at home using traditional methods, distilling fermented rice wine with a simple but clever device called soju gori. You can still see this type of still in museums today. It closely resembles distillation tools used in China and Mongolia in the past, showing just how interconnected these traditions were across Eurasia. So these portable, low-tech stills allowed for small-scale household production and reflected both innovation and deep cultural embedding. So when we talk about soju, we are not just talking about a Korean drink. We are also talking about a distilled spirit shaped by centuries of adaptation and exchange. Traditionally, soju was made from grains like rice or barley, but over time, especially in industrial production, other ingredients like sweet potatoes and tapioca entered the mix. So this reflects a broader truth about distilled liquor. liquors. Once a liquid is fermented, almost anything can be distilled into a spirit. Did you know that? So, but here's what makes soju even more fascinating. It is part of a much broader family of distilled liquors that developed across Eurasia, each shaped by its own cultural and technological context. So the Chinese xiaozhou, meaning burnt liquor, shares linguistic roots and early distillation methods with soju. And you have heard about Japanese shochu. This uses similar production techniques, but it's typically milder in alcohol content. And the map shows Middle Eastern arak, widely consumed today across Middle East, Central Asia, and the Mediterranean. Takes its name from the Arabic word for sweat, a reference to the condensation process in distillation. Interestingly, the term arak was historically used across much of Afro-Eurasia and even appears in old Chinese, Korean, and Japanese records. So these shared features are no coincidence. Scholars of global history have long debated the origins of distillation, with some arguing for a single birthplace and others pointing to multiple independent developments in regions like Near East, China, and India. At first, it was used not for drinking but for medicines and perfumes. It's only in the 13th and 14th centuries, during the Mongol period, that we began to see widespread documentation of distilled liquors as consumable spirits, especially in China and Korea. The earliest textual references to distilled liquors like xiaozhou, soju, and arak appear in 14th century Chinese and Korean sources, alongside archaeological evidence for especially Chinese ones. So seen in this broader historical context, we began to understand how intertwined these spirits became, not only in technique, but also in language and naming traditions. So soju derives its name from xiaozhou, a clear nod to its Chinese origin. Arak, a term used across much of Afro-Eurasia, appears in historical Korean and Japanese records as well. Even today, some Korean soju brands bear the name Arakju, offering a subtle reminder of this shared heritage. Soju then is not just a Korean creation, it's a result of centuries of global exchange. It's a story of borrowing, adapting, and transforming a shared technology into something uniquely Korean. And we will see later, the Choson dynasty played a key role in making soju truly Korean. To understand the origins of soju in Korea, we must travel back to the 13th and 14th century during the height of the Mongol Empire, one of the largest and most interconnected empire in world history. This was an era of unprecedented movement. People, goods, ideas, and technologies flowed across Eurasia on an extraordinary scale. Among these exchanges was a powerful and transformative technology, distillation. Although the Mongols were not the original inventors of distillation, they played a key role in disseminating and adapting it. In the Islamic world, in the Middle East, distillation had been refined for purposes ranging from medicine to perfumery to alchemy. In China, distillation was applied to fermented grains to produce spirits like xiaozhou, though it remained relatively limited prior to the Mongol conquest. Oh, actually, I wanted to show this. So let me be honest. This next part was one of the hardest to figure out while researching my book. So I often found myself tangled in a web of Chinese terms, Mongol customs, and evolving distillation practices. But the more I unraveled it, the more fascinating it became. So one of the most important and complex turning points in the history of soju happened not in Korea, but in Mongol China under Mongol rule. During the Mongol Empire, something remarkable occurred. So two types of distilled liquor, China's grain-based Soju and a foreign-style spirit called arak, began to intermingle and evolve together. Now, even before the Mongols arrived, the Chinese distillation during the late Song dynasty in the 12th and 13th centuries had already absorbed techniques from Southeast and South and West Asia. So when the Mongols conquered southern China, they inherited this rich tradition of brewing and distilling, but they didn't just copy it, they adapted it. The Mongols might have been interested in Chinese-style grain liquors. What they really cared about was actually preserving their own beloved liquor, arak or kumis, fermented mare's milk, which was central to their nomadic lifestyle. Distilling kumis into a stronger liquor called arak or arhi made it easier to store and transport, especially on long military campaigns or for big royal gatherings like Kuritai, where they chose new cans. So we even have records of foreign visitors like William of Rubruck and the famous Marco Polo witnessing this practice firsthand. For the Mongols, distillation was more than just cultural, it was strategic. But here's where it gets really interesting. So as the Mongols settled in China, they began to reshape and promote local industries, including distillation with Chinese grain-based technologies. By the end of the Yuan dynasty in the 14th century, Chinese sources often used the terms Soju and arak interchangeably to describe grain-based distilled spirits. In other words, what began as a Mongol adaptation of kumis became something entirely new, a hybrid liquor born from cultural fusion. And it was this hybrid liquor that made its way to Korea, well, also separately, in the late Goryeo period, along with the styles, techniques, and vocabulary that would eventually shape Soju. To really trace how Soju arrived in Korea, I had to zoom out and reconstruct this big picture across Eurasia. Oh, sorry. And so like putting together a historical jigsaw puzzle with pieces scattered across empires, languages, and centuries. And what I came to realize is that the Mongol Empire wasn't just a conduit, it was a creative lab, a space where technologies didn't just move, they were transformed. So when we talk about the origins of Soju, we are not pointing to a single source. It's not just Chinese or West or South Asian, not just Mongol, and not just Korean. It's the result of layered exchanges between mobile empires, settled civilizations, and local adaptations over time. And to my great surprise, a well-known expert on Chinese drinking culture later included my book in a list of the 5 best books on Chinese alcohol and drinking history. And that kind of recognition was deeply meaningful, not just for me, but for Soju itself, which has too often been overlooked in studies of East Asian liquors. So how did all this distillation knowledge make its way to Korea? So at the time, Korea was under the Koreana dynasty, and it had a close, if complicated, relationship with the Mongol Empire. As a vassal state, in what some called a son-in-law state due to royal intermarriage, Korea maintained deep political and cultural ties with the Mongols. This meant more than just diplomacy. Mongol troops were stationed in Korea, and many Koreans, including diplomats, merchants, and those in more difficult situations, such as individuals sent as tribute, traveled to Mongol capital in China. As a result, technology, ideas, and goods flowed in both directions, including the art of distillation. One of the clearest examples of this cultural exchange is the introduction of distilled liquor like Soju and arak into Korea. We see this in late Korea sources, which offer some of the earliest Korean references to distilled drinks. A particular vivid example comes from the 14th century scholar Isek. In one of his poems, he describes a distilled liquor called araji in Chinese and aragil in Korean as forming like autumn dewdrops and dropping down at night. So he writes that after drinking just half a cup, a warm feeling spread through his bones. So this elegant metaphor tells us something powerful. By this point, drinking distilled liquor was not just known, it was appreciated, even poetic. So a few other sources from the time mention soju as a type of distilled liquor. The word soju itself comes from the Chinese xiaozhuo, meaning burnt liquor, a direct reference to the distillation process. Later, Koreans began to call it noju, or a dewdrop liquor. The same poetic image of morning dew even inspired the name of Korea's biggest soju brand in the 20th century, Jinro, meaning true dewdrop. In other words, by the 14th century, soju wasn't just present in Korea, it had already begun taking root as something distinctly Korean, shaped by both global transmission and local imagination. As for distillation technology, at first, the first stills introduced to Korea were likely simple Mongolian style apparatuses, which enabled efficient and relatively rapid diffusion of the technology across the peninsula. So this exchange did not occur in isolation. Alongside distillation came other elements of Mongol cultural influence. The introduction of meat-heavy cuisine, in contrast to Buddhist dietary restrictions, revived hunting traditions and new currents in philosophy, astronomy, and cartography, including this famous Gangnido, including Gangnido world map, including Europe and Africa. It's all in this kind of trend. So in this way, soju offers a fascinating entry point into understanding Korea's position within the wider Pax Mongolica, the vast interconnected network of Eurasia in the 13th and 14th centuries. Its arrival in Korea marks the first major transition in its history, from a foreign technique shaped by transcontinental exchange to a localized practice that will grow deeply rooted in Korean culture. So in the coming centuries, soju would continue to evolve, shaped by new influences and changing political landscapes. But its origins remind us that even the most authentic cultural traditions often began as products of global exchange. So now that soju had arrived in Korea, what happened next? How did it transform from an imported technology into a uniquely Korean drink? So let's explore its journey through the Choson dynasty. After its introduction during the Mongol period, soju gradually became an integral part of Korean society, taking on roles that extended far beyond simple consumption. During the Joseon dynasty, soju was no longer just a foreign technology or an elite luxury. It became deeply embedded in Korean daily life, traditions, and governance. This period marks a key transition. Soju was no longer just Korea, it was now distinctly Korean. So soju's significance during this time extended far beyond just being an enjoyable drink. So soju became a key part of Korea's gayangju, or home brewing tradition. So across the peninsula, families and local communities produce their own varieties of soju using regionally available ingredients. Some areas used rice as a base, while others used alternative grains like barley in Jeju Island. So this artisanal approach fostered a rich diversity of soju styles, each with distinctive flavors and alcohol content. Over time, soju became so prevalent that even cookbooks and medical manuals began to document its use, including its importance not just as a drink but as an everyday ingredient. So one of the most notable examples is 음식 비밀방, the first cookbook written by a woman in East Asia, which includes detailed soju recipes using rice and traditional yeast in a Korean-style style, that is soju gori. Compiled in Korean script by Lady Chang of Andong, the book shows that soju making using soju gori had become a familiar household skill, often passed down through generations of women. So we also speak soju in royal court and diplomatic use. The Choson royal court recognized the value of soju and formalized its production and distribution. So records indicate that a bureau within the court was tasked with distilling soju to meet official needs. And soju was used in diplomatic exchanges and presented as prestigious gifts to foreign countries like China, Japan, and Ryukyu, Joseon's neighboring countries. Ordinary households were sometimes required to submit soju as tribute, a practice that contributed to its broader spread throughout Korean society. And soju was also incorporated into jesa, ancestral rites, central to Confucian life. While Cheongju, fermented rice wine, was traditionally used, soju's longer shelf life made it a practical alternative, especially in warmer summer months. This helped solidify soju's place in Korea's spiritual and familiar practices. And soju was believed to have therapeutic properties and was used in traditional medicine to aid with digestion, promote circulation, and clean wounds. Its widespread consumption, however, also drew concern, as rice, its primary ingredient, was a vital staple. The government imposed restrictions on soju production during periods of drought and famine. And medical texts of the time also warned of overconsumption and its side effects, underscoring the need for balance. Actually, as for regional adaptations, we can look at the case of Jeju Island. On Jeju Island, where humid conditions made fermented drinks hard to preserve, soju emerged as the dominant local spirit, using barley. The island's unique environment, combined with Mongol military presence during earlier centuries, contributed to the development of its own distilling culture. How did Korea's approaches differ from China and beyond in general? As distillation spread across Asia, soju began to follow a distinct path in Korea. In China, distilled liquor baijiu became a major commercial product, mass-produced in large-scale distilleries. We have archaeological excavations for that. In contrast, Korea's soju remained rooted in small-scale local production. Families and communities made their own batches, shared at home, used in rituals, or exchanges in local markets. This difference matters. While soju's origin was shaped by Eurasian exchange, its evolution in Korea reflected local conditions, cultural values, climate, ingredients, and institutions. So over time, soju became more than just a drink from Korea. It became a Korean drink in spirit, identity, and practice. But this traditional world wouldn't last forever. So by the late 19th and early 20th centuries, soju encountered another major turning point, driven by colonization, industrialization, and global capitalism. So what changed? So let's take a look at how modern soju emerged and how it set the stage for its global rise. The first transformation to consider is the modernization of the soju distillation industry. which involved the introduction of new technologies and methods during the colonial rule of Korea by Imperial Japan from 1910 to 1945. During the period, traditional soju, according to distillation methods and recipes made conventional during Choson times, declined gradually as Japanese companies introduced and popularized a modern industrial form to Korean consumers. Instead of using a traditional distillation apparatus like soju gori, the new industrial form of soju introduced by the Japanese has used a continuous still for mass production at low cost in large factories that innovators in European societies developed during the 18th century and later introduced to Japan in the 19th century. This is a photo of an industrial soju factory in Jeju in 1943. And this one, the left one is a photo of ethanol distilling columns in Korea in recent years. The second transformation occurred amidst the new environment of rapid economic development and state building that defined Korea, South Korea in particular, between its independence in 1945 and its realization of developed nation status in the late 20th century. During this half-century, Korea faced many chaotic and difficult situations, as you know, that presented them with major challenges, including Korean War, rapid modernization, and industrialization led by a dictatorial government, followed by a fiercely determined democratization movement. The Korean government supported factory-manufactured industrial soju made from potatoes instead of its traditional ingredient, rice, because it lacked grain. So only in the 1980s did the government begin to promote traditionally distilled soju as minsokju, literally national folk liquor, part of its policy of promoting national culture. This encouraged a revival of traditional soju, whose consumption had declined during the era of Japanese rule. The traditional soju available to us nowadays is the one revived at this period. These two maps show major modern industrial soju companies and their representative regional brands, typically made from potatoes and tapioca rather than rice, alongside major revived traditional soju companies and their corresponding regional brands like Andong Soju. However, this industrialization also set the stage for soju's next major transformation, its global expansion in the 21st century. So what happened when soju stepped beyond Korea's borders? Let's explore the globalization of soju and its rise as an international drink. Oh, yes. So soju's story doesn't end with industrialization. So in the 21st century, it takes yet another fascinating turn, a leap onto the global stage. So what was once a traditional Korean spirit, enjoyed mainly within the peninsula, has now become a recognizable international drink, appearing in restaurants, bars, and liquor stores around the world. This rapid expansion was not accidental. It was fueled by globalization, strategic branding, and the meteoric rise of Korean pop culture Hallyu, which introduced soju to an international audience in ways no one could have predicted a few decades ago. So how did soju go global? So soju's international rise has been driven by several key factors. First, the Korean wave, Hallyu, played a major role. The global popularity of K-pop, K-dramas, and Korean cuisine introduced soju to new audiences. Viewers saw characters sharing soju in meaningful social rituals, often involving respect, bonding, and tradition. So these scenes sparked curiosity and familiarity with soju abroad. Major celebrities also became brand ambassadors, further increasing its visibility. At the same time, Korean companies like Jinro and Chamisul actively expanded into overseas markets. Soju began showing up in Asian supermarkets, restaurants in other countries, and liquor stores across North America, Europe, and beyond, according to newspaper articles, even Africa. And flavored soju helped widen its appeal. With fruit-infused varieties like grapefruit and peach, it became more accessible to international drinkers unfamiliar with the traditional taste. So I even spotted bottles of flavored soju in a supermarket in Ulaanbaatar, the capital of Mongolia, during my 2018 field research. They were displayed alongside bottles of Arki, the popular modern Mongolian vodka, so another reminder of how distilled spirits travel and adapt across cultures. So finally, global markets adapt the soju to local preferences, serving it on the rocks, mixing it with soda, or blending it into cocktails like soju margaritas or somek, soju plus beer. So these innovations have to transform soju into a truly global spirit. Soju's global reach today is backed by impressive numbers. Jinro, one of the leading brands, sells over 13 billion bottles annually, making it the world's best-selling spirit by volume. With exports to more than 100 countries and an average alcohol content of around 17%, soju has become both accessible and adaptable on a global scale. So the soju that makes Korean soju internationally popular in the 21st century is indeed the mass-produced diluted version. So this photo was taken with permission during my visit to the Mackey's company soju factory in Daejeon. At this factory, 600 bottles are produced per minute. And at larger factories like Jinro, the number can even reach up to 1,000 bottles per minute. At the same time, foreign makers boldly appropriated Korean spirits, leading to innovations in soju that could compete in Korea and abroad. This recent transformation during the past century catalyzed the development of today's soju as a new global brand. So one of the most fascinating examples of this global turn comes from an unexpected place, Brooklyn, New York. There, an experienced distiller named Brandon here launched a new brand called Toki Soju, Toki meaning rabbit in Korean. Initially interested by the rising popularity of Korean industrial soju in the US, he traveled to Korea to learn about it firsthand. But what truly captured his imagination wasn't the green bottle. It was actually traditional rice-based soju from the Choson dynasty. So inspired by what he tasted, he returned to Brooklyn and began producing soju using modern distillation equipment similar to that used for whiskey, but with Korean ingredients and techniques. Rice and nuru, traditional fermentation starter. So his product made outside Korea, but now also in Korea, following Korean methods, soon gained a dedicated following, appearing in Korean restaurants across the US, and even making it its way into Korea through informal and at times illegal channels. Soju has become a familiar name on the menus of many Korean restaurants across the US. And recently, I was surprised to find Toki Soju featured newly in the in-flight duty-free catalog of Asian airlines. So imagine that a Korean traditional spirit reimagined in Brooklyn and now re-imported to Korea through airplane shopping carts. So let me point out that the soju that made soju, Korean soju famous globally in the 21st century is the mass-produced industrial soju. It has less alcohol, only around 20%, than a traditional brand with more than 45% alcohol. Soju made of rice in a traditional distillation way has a smoother, richer taste. But these industrial soju factories have also made great efforts to improve the flavor and quality, responding to changing consumer tastes both at home and overseas. So in fact, even traditional distilled soju has found new way through innovations like Hwayo soju, which we will taste later, and through pop culture branding, as seen in One Soju. In a 2023 article by Fiona Ng, who interviewed me for the piece, she highlights how K-hip-hop star Jay Park launched a line of artisanal soju produced using traditional methods and promoted it globally with K-pop style marketing. So this leads us to a deeper question. So what exactly soju is? And what does it mean to call it traditional or authentic when it has changed so much over time? So in my book, I argue that authenticity isn't just preserving something unchanged, but about recognizing continuity through change. Industrial soju may taste different from traditional soju, but it is still part of the long historical process that shaped Korean distilling culture. Koreans embraced it, and now the world has too. Interestingly, soju's rise in 2000 mirrors earlier waves of cultural exchange. Just as distillation came to Korea via the Mongol Empire, new techniques during the Japanese colonial era, originally rooted in European and Islamic science, transformed Korean soju production again. The result? A drink that reflects global history at every turn. Its smooth, mild taste and social rituals make soju easy to enjoy and easy to share, whether straight, in cocktails, or over a meal. And today, producers are reinventing soju once more using local ingredients, sustainable practices, and creative branding to meet a global market. That's not a break from tradition. It's tradition evolving. So in the final chapter of my book, I also explored shochu in Japan and tequila in Mexico, two other spirits with similar global journeys. And I would be happy to discuss them more during the Q&A. So let me end with a few closing thoughts. I hope I haven't confused you too much. But if I have, maybe that's a sign the topic's more fascinating than it first appears. So studying soju taught me something beyond the drink itself. The foods and beverages we enjoy today are the result of long histories of exchange of ideas, technologies, and people moving across borders because they brought these ideas and goods. So every glass raised is a quiet celebration of global connection. Understanding this helps us push back against narrow nationalism. I love Korean food, but I also love pasta, tacos, and curry. So our identities aren't diluted by diversity. They are deepened by it. So I wrote this book not just as a Korean historian, but as a global one, hoping readers would gain a deeper appreciation of Korean culture through context, not just pride. So next time you see a bottle of soju, whether in Seoul, New York, or everywhere, think of the centuries behind it. The Mongol steppes, Choson kitchens, Japanese colonial and modern Korean factories, and maybe even K-pop star. And if you fly Asiana Airlines, maybe Korean Airlines too. This time I only use Asiana. So flip over through the duty-free catalog, you might spot Toki soju or other soju, or definitely Hwayo, Bonin, and all different kinds of soju. Thank you so much for being here. I would love to take your questions. And before I go, look at the Marvel comics poster I saw in Korean newspaper. So it's strikingly similar to a lesser-known painting in the National Museum of Korea that I took for the cover of my book. And I cannot help but wonder, maybe someone at Marvel read my book. Thank you so much.
So thank you, Professor, for showing us that soju is more than just a drink, but a distilled narrative of Eurasian exchange and memory. Later, when we raise a glass of soju, we can find ourselves tasting not only the tingly sweet swallow, but the echoes of Mongolian legacy and Choson tradition. So, ladies and gentlemen, may I ask for another big hand for Dr.